Hello and welcome to our podcast series, Myers-Briggs for Midlife Career Changers. I'm David from Editbits.com and I'm the producer of this series. We're going to be discussing the INTP type today and the unique issues that mid-career INTPs face. Our expert is Edythe Richards, Myers-Briggs Master Practitioner and founder of a top career. We'll begin by giving an overview of INTPs, delving into cognitive functions, which are the middle two letters of one's Myers-Briggs type, the strengths and weaknesses of INTPs, workplace satisfiers, and finally, career paths that other INTPs have found satisfying. Edythe, let's start with the overview.
Thanks, David. INTPs are one of the rarer of the 16 Myers-Briggs types and one of the most misunderstood types as well. For example, other types may see them as cold and emotionless, when this is quite far from the truth, and we'll see why shortly. INTPs are natural skeptics, so they're one of the Myers-Briggs types most likely to challenge the underlying principles of personality type.
Uh-oh, I hope you're prepared for that.
I certainly am. I've had years of experience dealing with all Myers-Briggs types, but INTPs are indeed a special case. Things are rarely black and white for them. I personally appreciate their intelligence and their dry humor. All INTP types I've known have had both to varying degrees at various times in their lives. And for those of our listeners who have already verified that they are INTP, and you're wondering whether or not this podcast is even worth listening to, please know that it's not enough just to know that you're an INTP type. Like other Myers-Briggs types, you have strengths and challenges, and you want to capitalize on your strengths while working on being a better person. If you're listening to this podcast because you know someone who's an INTP, this information will hopefully help you understand what type of person you're dealing with so you can adjust accordingly.
Great points, Edythe. I'd also like to remind our listeners that our intent in this podcast is not to pigeonhole all INTPs or make assumptions based on this Myers-Briggs type. Your individual experience may be different from what others describe here.
Thanks for mentioning that, David. We really don't want to lump all INTPs into a box, but we do hope that some of what we convey here today will resonate with our INTP listeners and help build self-awareness, which will lead to greater clarity and confidence in career development.
Right, and that's our intent, helping our listeners enhance their self-awareness. So, before we delve into INTPs in more detail, let's begin by defining what INTP stands for.
Sounds good. INTP stands for introverted. They're energized by the inner world of thoughts and reflections, not the outer world of people and things. Intuitive. They pay more attention to their sixth sense possibilities and abstract information than to the detailed sensory world. Thinking. They make decisions based on logic and analysis before paying attention to the impact that their decisions have on people. And perceiving. They prefer a flexible approach to life over a structured approach.
Now these people sound very interesting, Edythe. Tell us more about some of the defining factors of INTPs.
Well, absent-minded professors come to mind more than any of the other Myers-Briggs types.
So they're kind of in their own worlds, shy, unfocused, socially awkward, but highly intelligent?
Some INTPs may seem this way to others. Many INTPs, especially the younger people, have an exceptionally easy time of just not caring how they appear to the rest of the world, or whether how they're behaving is socially acceptable. And we've got to admire them for that.
Yes, indeed we do.
INTPs are convinced only by logic, and they rarely, if ever, base a decision on subjective emotional considerations. It takes work for them to become in tune with their own or other people's emotional states or needs, and this is often a lifelong battle for INTPs. They're naturally driven to poke holes in other people's theories or bluntly point out logical inconsistencies in plans or arguments. Whatever it is they're working on, they struggle to fit all the pieces together into a complete picture that's ever expanding because they're continually discovering new data. As a result, all of their thoughts and ideas and plans are subject to last-minute changes. And keep in mind, all of this is going on underneath the surface because of their introversion, so the rest of the world doesn't see and likely doesn't understand their decision-making process. This can be terribly frustrating to others, But it's very exciting for the INTP because they're driven to mastering their ideas and they have this quest for competency.
This sounds quite complicated. I expect that if I encounter an INTP, I'm going to need to expect an intellectual challenge.
Well, that's actually spot on, David. As we've pointed out, INTPs are natural skeptics, and because they think in shades of gray rather than in black and white, they're prone to overanalyzing topics. At the same time, they're their own worst critics. They pride themselves on being the first to knock down their own theories and correct themselves with an improved one. They may very occasionally overreact out of emotion, much to their own chagrin, if they become frustrated by the inconsistent logic of someone else's opinion or if their own competence is questioned.
So they're one of the most honest types we've encountered then, even if their honesty is often misplaced or exhibited at the wrong time.
Right, most INTPs I know are profoundly honest. One of my closest friends is an INTP. When I'm confused about something or having a problem and I need an immediate answer, she's my go-to person to set me straight. She is not going to wallow with me in my misery, but she's going to tell me like it is in a no-nonsense way, and sometimes that's what we need.
Yes, that sounds very valuable to me. I mean, sometimes we all need a good kick in the arse, don't we? I'm guessing INTPs, even though they're outspoken at times, are also very independent. Edythe, would you say this is true?
This is absolutely one of the most defining qualities of INTPs, their fierce, independent nature. They can be outspoken, as we've seen, but only about things that are important to them. In addition to being natural skeptics, they're natural pessimists too, but with typically high critical thinking skills, and some would say above average intelligence, but then this would depend how one defines intelligence.
That's a discussion for another day perhaps, but an interesting one to pursue nonetheless. Especially for INTP listeners.
Yes, let's leave that for another day. I'll close this portion of the discussion by saying that INTP's greatest satisfaction comes from finding the truth, coming up with theories and getting the facts to support them, challenging themselves to think in new and changing ways, creating new situations to experience. Logic is their ruler and their worlds are based on their own finely tuned logical framework. Emotions have nothing to do with this, but that doesn't mean that INTPs don't pick up on the emotions of people close to them. They may not always be very good at responding to them, however. Ultimately, INTPs thoroughly enjoy their lives through their own deep conscious thoughts, and this isn't the way the rest of the world operates, much to the surprise of the INTP.
I bet this logic also gets INTPs into trouble. For example, what happens when they can't logically think themselves out of a difficult situation? This is a good place to shift the conversation to the cognitive functions, so we can hopefully answer this and other questions our listeners might have. Cognitive functions, for those of you who don't know, are the middle two letters of one's Myers-Briggs type. In the case of INTPs, we're talking about intuition and thinking. Edythe, could you please explain this a bit further?
Sure, we can think of the dominant function like the driver's seat in a car. When you're in the driver's seat, you have the most control, and it's the part of your personality that you identify with the most. If I were to ask you to describe yourself, you'd spend the majority of your time describing this function. For INTP types, this function is introverted thinking. If we recall, the thinking function is about how we make decisions. Thinking types prefer to make decisions based on logic, not harmony and goodwill. Introverted thinking means that this decision-making is going on beneath the surface and it's not visible to others. If we recall, INTPs are extremely logical individuals. In fact, they're a bit obsessed with logical correctness, which is a defining factor for introverted thinking. How this function works is by creating a framework and then sifting through all the data within that framework, scanning for inconsistencies. The ultimate goal is to find clarity, things that make sense. Once the user has this clarity, they use it to determine which course of action to take. Data is extremely important to the introverted thinker. Remember, these folks don't want biases, attachments, or emotions to muddy the waters of their decisions.
I imagine science and math are probably interesting fields then.
Right, science, computer science, and other disciplines that tolerate little to no personal interpretation of data are hugely satisfying to introverted thinkers.
Yes, I can understand why. Now, how about the secondary or auxiliary function?
Right, so back to the car analogy. In the passenger seat of our cars, in the front passenger seat of our cars, we have our auxiliary function. This is a function we identify with, but not nearly as strongly as we do with the driver. This function for INTPs is extroverted intuition, which is essentially all about generating possibilities in the real world. If we recall, intuition is a preference for learning that focuses on patterns, what those patterns mean, and the possibilities that can come from those patterns. People who use this function have millions of ideas floating around in their heads, and they're natural brainstormers, but they may have trouble sticking to just one idea and developing it over a long period of time. However, extroverted intuitives tend to be creative and out of the box. The more inventive an idea, the better. And similarly, the more possibilities they come up with, the better. The future isn't meant to have only one outcome. Multiple scenarios are always preferred for extroverted intuitives, and as such, these folks are great at opening up options when everyone else thinks all the possibilities have been exhausted.
Edythe, let's talk about how these two functions work together in an INTP's career development.
While INTP types use their auxiliary extroverted intuition to learn and gather new information in their external environments, their dominant introverted thinking provides a framework to determine which of their ideas are logical to pursue. This results in a logically consistent argument, which is the proof that supports their speculation. INTPs are the world's big picture problem solvers, especially regarding systems. They'll be at their best when they're working independently for long stretches of time to develop a solution to a problem that's too complex or too intellectually challenging for others. As we've seen, INTPs analyze systems very differently from other types, and these folks are therefore often the creative geniuses behind many of the world's breakthroughs. Albert Einstein, Charles Darwin, George Lucas, and the author Tolkien have all been described as INTPs.
Oh wow, I'm a big fan of these guys. Now, I know you've mentioned before, Edythe, the dangers of assuming that someone is a certain personality type without them having verified it first. For new listeners, these celebrity types may or may not be INTPs, but many of their characteristics are consistent with behaviours people have traditionally observed with this type.
Good reminder, David. This is a good place for us to get into some specific strengths and weaknesses for INTPs. And as we've just mentioned, these are often what I've seen with other INTP types, but your individual INTP experience may or may not be different.
Okay, good. Tell me more about these INTP strengths.
One thing I appreciate about INTPs is that they're highly imaginative, even as adults. There's this stereotype that INTPs are science fiction geeks, which I believe is true to a certain extent, but they're also philosophers generating endless possibilities about the human condition. As writers, they're more likely to write fiction or technical works that engage with the reader's logical sensibilities, rather than writing about feelings and emotions. INTPs are almost always technologically savvy. As we've seen, technology, numbers, and facts provide INTPs with the data they need to make logical decisions. INTPs are also described as independent and autonomous in every way. More than many other types, we see INTPs creating their own careers or modifying available jobs to be more satisfying to them. Along these lines, INTPs are innovative, not just with technology, but with challenging the status quo. As we've said, they're master problem solvers, especially interested in perfecting complex theoretical issues. They tend to be open-minded, intrigued by almost anything, serial hobbyists, so to speak, and may enjoy risk-taking, looking beyond what's known or accepted at the present time. And of course, they're logical individuals who need to make sense of everything in their quest to perfect the overall system.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that the more mature an INTP becomes, the more open they become to other people's input, even though they're naturally, as you say, very autonomous people. Edythe, what do you think?
You're onto something here, David. One thing INTPs tend to strive towards is competence, not allowing their biases to affect that. But let's face it, the more they're in their own worlds, the more likely this is to happen. I think a mature INTP would be delighted by getting rid of the data that may affect their clarity. And if it's a person who proves them wrong and cites evidence for that, then yes, it's logical in these cases that they'll be very happy to be proven wrong and have others' input.
It does sound as though it may be hard to get to this point. INTPs sound like difficult folk for other types to communicate with. So I imagine this might be one of the areas of weakness that you'll be talking about today. Right, Edythe?
Well, like any other type, INTPs do have areas they need to work on, and yes, one is communication. INTPs are often seen as people who don't care for others, even by people they know well, and this is a huge misconception. INTPs aren't naturally attuned to their emotions or the emotions of others, and they're in their heads so much of the time, so others don't always know how to relate to them. And in all fairness, the INTP may not know how to relate to others, or may be completely oblivious to how he or she is coming across to others. For our non-INTP listeners out there, if you know an INTP type who isn't showing you his or her emotions, the likely reason is that they don't feel safe enough to do so. They get scared easily and guard their hearts any way they can, often by retreating inside themselves. But please don't take this personally. In these cases, the INTP probably hasn't shared their emotions with themselves either. They also don't know if what they say hurts or offends others, and to be honest, many times they don't care. They're often considered tactless. In fact, emotions can be almost radioactive for INTPs. They can blow up like a ticking time bomb.
Oh, wow.
It's a lifelong challenge for many INTPs to learn proper balance with emotions. Imagine carrying a huge pot of hot soup that's in danger of overflowing. INTPs feel a need to avoid walking on slippery slopes for fear of falling and the hot soup burning them, because once it does, it supercharges them, violating and embarrassing them, and they could be scarred for life. Retreating to their own shell is safe, but most INTPs reach a point when they realize the benefit of emotions.
Yes, like when they're in trouble. We all need friends to help us out sometimes. Like when we get scalded by hot soup.
Yes, it's unfortunate that many INTPs fail to develop effective communication strategies due to their inability or reluctance to empathize with others. INTPs often do want to talk about deep philosophical topics with others, but there's this little voice that's saying it's socially inappropriate to do so, or others won't care about these things. At the same time, many INTPs are just bored by socializing and, frankly, bored by most other people. As a result, they may become isolated, unaccepting of other people's viewpoints, or even insulting to others and oblivious to the effect of their words and behaviors. As much as they may wish the world was populated by robots without emotions, this isn't the way things are. If INTPs want others to understand their world, they have to work hard to understand other people's worlds.
Good advice. Now we'll be going into more specific strategies for INTPs who want to work on those areas. But first, Edythe, any other INTP weaknesses?
Just one or two. A marked weakness for INTPs is what might seem like procrastination or lack of action to onlookers. They may also be commitment phobic, not just in relationships, but in every area of their lives without proper balance. An INTP man I know is often quite frustrating for me to deal with because he rarely commits to any type of activity or schedule. And more than half of the time I do make plans with him, he cancels. I've actually given up planning anything with him because of this flakiness, which if I didn't know better, I'd say was disinterest. Yet there are times that he just pops up and wants to get together as if nothing happened.
This could be typical behaviour from INTPs though. They're free spirits who hate being tied down. But it also sounds like they can be bitten by the productivity bug. Other times to the point of becoming obsessed with structuring their worlds.
Right, from being completely spontaneous to completely planful. Others never quite know what to expect from INTPs. They're often described as the proverbial jacks of all trades, masters of none. And as we implied, INTPs do a great job at distracting themselves from their inner fears. And this may take the form of neglecting responsibilities and instead watching too much TV, playing video games, or surfing the net to avoid feeling anxious about facing their problems or actually participating in life. They may even right out refuse to deal with repetitive and/or mundane projects. And this is especially true with younger INTPs. They can be quite passive-aggressive. The last item I'll mention is some insecurity that many INTPs have with regards to others invalidating their conclusions or questioning their logic. When this happens, the natural thing for the INTP to do is just to assume that those people are idiots. We often see younger INTPs with this pervasive need to be right all the time, and they're accused of being arrogant.
Right. So, for our INTP listeners who have received feedback that sounds similar, this portion of the podcast is where Edythe offers strategies to achieve better balance. One thing I know you always advocate, Edythe, is for everyone to start using their non-preferred functions. These are the letters that don't appear in our Myers-Briggs type. For INTPs, these are sensing and feeling. Edythe, is that correct?
Yes, indeed you are, David. I'm going to suggest some strategies that have worked for other INTP types I've worked with over the years. One is to consciously be friendly towards others. For example, asking coworkers about their weekends, going out of your way to say good morning, having small talk at work. And I understand that to INTP types this may feel like it's going overboard. But from the other person's point of view, it's taking an active interest in building and maintaining rapport. So for my INTP listeners, if you haven't reached out to an old friend in a long time or shown appreciation for people you're close to, remember that these small words or acts can really go a long way to make the other person feel engaged. This in turn builds trust, which is an important part of personal and professional relationships. Along these lines, it's important not to let emotions take control. INTP types have the propensity, as we've discussed earlier, for emotional outbursts. Learning to become more aware of one's personal feelings and emotions and understanding the benefits of emotions are strategies to deal with this. Emotions shouldn't be ignored because they are illogical.
These are great words, Edythe. Now, I'm guessing that's a thought pattern that often gets INTPs into a mess. I'd say for INTPs who enjoy writing or journaling, that may well be a great way to explore their emotions.
That's a great idea. I'd also say spontaneously acknowledging the efforts of others, offer compliments, and work on gaining cooperation rather than compliance.
Yeah, that's really good. Small things like that really do add up. These are great strategies, Edythe. Now, what about for INTPs who are flaky? Like that person you mentioned before.
Well, this isn't going to be fun, but planning and adhering to schedules is a necessary part of life. Set SMART goals. SMART meaning specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-sensitive is something I often recommend for all of my clients. Some INTP types also struggle with feelings of being a fraud or that their internal confidence doesn't match their outward achievements. In these cases, it would be great if they're able to discuss these feelings with a trusted friend or advisor who can provide a more realistic assessment.
When they're on track, I'm guessing INTPs are tireless in their pursuit of logical correctness. Now, this brings us to the career and workplace needs of INTPs. Edythe, what can you tell us about this?
To work in depth on one creative challenge at a time, giving it full attention without a lot of interruptions, the opportunity to develop innovative approaches and systems, but not get bogged down in the details of the implementation, an atmosphere of professionalism and mutual respect, where their expertise is recognized and respected, and where they have some say in how they're evaluated and compensated. An unstructured work environment that encourages free thinking and improvisation, without senseless rules, unnecessary meetings, or lots of paperwork, and the chance to logically analyze existing and potential systems and make recommendations for strategic changes. INTP types will do best when they're given lots of leeway to get things done on their own schedules using their brains and exceptional problem-solving skills. They're not going to be as successful when they're boxed into one role, one industry, or one project.
That makes great sense. Now, let's hear about the specific career paths that INTPs have found satisfying.
Careers most often selected by INTP types fall into 5 general areas: planning and development, medical and technical, professional, academic, and creative.
Keeping in mind that there are successful INTPs in all fields, and that your career path may not appear on this list, we do hope that some of these paths will resonate with you. Edythe, let's start with the planning and development category.
Possible career choices in this area include software designer or engineer, computer programmer, research and development specialist, systems analyst, and strategic planner. These careers offer INTP types the opportunity to do what they do best, which is to analyze what's going wrong and come up with an innovative solution. As we discussed previously, many INTPs are highly technical individuals and easily understand complex systems that baffle the rest of us. Locating errors and spotting weaknesses are quite easy for many INTP types, as is seeing how a product or service fits within the context of the whole company or industry, and they enjoy coming up with more efficient ways to do things.
And the next category, please, Edythe.
The next category is medical and technical. Possible career choices here include neurologist, physicist, plastic surgeon, pharmacist, and a scientist particularly specializing in chemistry or biology.
Aha! I figured these would be on the list, due to what we talked about earlier with INTPs liking science and complex information.
Yes, the field of science and medicine makes good use of INTP's excellent reasoning skills, and many of these fields offer the opportunity to be on the cutting edge of new technologies that will benefit the world. Science itself often poses the question, what if? Which is often a recurring question to many INTP types. Additionally, being surrounded by other intellectual people is quite stimulating for INTPs, as is the opportunity to do research independently on their own schedule.
And next, the professional category.
The professional category also offers the INTP opportunities to analyze and solve complex problems, and like the other fields, careers in this category, lawyer, economist, financial analyst, psychologist, and architect, are intellectually challenging and require new and innovative approaches, as well as forecasting trends.
Yes, along with seeing how one element fits into the overall scheme or pattern, which is another strength of INTPs as we've discussed. Next up, the academic category.
Academia is tremendously appealing to most INTPs I know, mainly because free thought is encouraged in these environments, as is exploration of ideas and independent research. Archaeologist, mathematician, historian, philosopher, university instructor or college faculty, especially for advanced students, and researcher are all career paths for INTPs to consider. INTPs love to share their insights with their intellectual peers, and thus there's a preference for working with more advanced and challenging material and people. As we mentioned, INTPs will work best in an absence of bureaucracy and when they aren't restricted by excessive rules.
And the last one, Edythe?
Last but certainly not least, the creative category. Careers in this category include photographer, creative writer, artist, entertainer, and musician. One of the driving forces for many INTPs is to create something completely original. Different artistic mediums and some interaction with other creative types is appealing to INTPs as long as they spend a significant amount of their time working alone. They may enjoy performing, but not necessarily for the sake of performing itself, as much as for sharing their creative and clever talents.
This is a great list, Edythe. I hope our INTP listeners have found this content useful. especially if they're looking to make a career change. Remember though, these are only some areas that provide satisfying expression for the unique talents of the INTP.
And remember, this information is only meant to be a guide.
Of course. To our INTP listeners, you're still a unique person with unique attributes and talents. Knowing and leveraging your strengths and working on your blind spots will give you a tremendous advantage if or when you're thinking of a career change.
And if you're like many INTP types I've worked with over the years and are unsure of what career direction to head in, know that you're not alone. As we've discussed, many INTPs have similar challenges with decisions in many aspects of their lives. But we hope that the information we shared with you today can help you get back on track.
Excellent. Now, as we close, Edythe, any final thoughts?
The information in this podcast is based on my own knowledge of and experience using the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. I'd also like to cite some additional sources for this information, which include Type Talk by Otto Kroger, Do What You Are by Paul Teeger and Barbara Barron-Teeger, and Life Types by Jean Kumaro and Sandra Hirsch.
Edythe, as always, thanks for your expertise. Edythe is a Myers-Briggs Master Practitioner and Career Counsellor. You can read more about her and listen to more Myers-Briggs podcasts at www.atopcareer.com. My name's David and I'm the producer of this series. Thanks for listening and see you again soon. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and of course our website, where you can sign up for our newsletter at www.atopcareer.com. Feel free to share this file with your friends. Until next time. MBTI and Myers-Briggs are registered trademarks of the MBTI Trust.